Hello, I hope you're doing well. Today our goal is to solve quadratics by using the quadratic formula. In the past, we have solved quadratics by factoring and by graphing, but these methods only work if there are real solutions. If there are imaginary solutions, you cannot get your answer by factoring or graphing. So we need another way. Another method of solving is the quadratic formula. And so you can see the quadratic formula listed here. X equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. In order to use the quadratic formula, you have to have a quadratic, and you have to get that quadratic equal to 0. Once everything is equal to 0, whatever's in front of the x squared is going to be your a, whatever's in front of the x is going to be your b, and whatever's in front of, or just your constant, is going to be c. After you identify a, b, and c, we can plug it into the quadratic formula. Now you'll notice here there's an x squared and there's nothing in front there. When that happens, a is 1. So now what we're going to do is we're going to plug this into the quadratic formula. Also, I should probably mention here that you notice it is already equal to 0. We didn't have to manipulate it at all. Sometimes you have to move things around first in order to do the quadratic formula. So here we go. We're going to use this. X equals negative b. Well, since b is already negative 6, it's going to become a positive 6, plus or minus the square root of b, which is negative 6 squared, minus 4 times a times c. All of that is over 2 times a. Now, after you plug everything in, what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to figure out what underneath the square root, what that equals. We're going to simplify that part first. So we're going to get x equals 6 plus or minus the square root. And so what we really want to do is we want to do negative 6 squared, which is 36, minus, and we're going to multiply all of those together. 4 times 1 is 4. So there is a 32 under the square root. All of that is over 2 times 1, which is 2. Now, before we can divide at all, we have to simplify that square root because we cannot reduce 32 over 2 because the 32 is under the square root and the 2 is not. So we are going to go ahead and we are going to take 32 and break it down. And we're going to use our simplifying square roots by looking for pairs. And when we do that, we are going to get 4 root 2. That's what the square root of 32 is going to simplify to. Now that we have simplified it, we have two different things we're going to reduce by 2. So we're going to do 6 over 2, and that becomes 3. But we're also going to do 4 root 2 over 2. And so what happens is the 4 out in front is going to be divided by 2, and we're going to get 2. And the radical part stays the way it was, which is actually a 2 there. I actually wrote a 3. So it should be 2 root 2. Nothing else simplifies, so that would be our answer here. X equals 3 plus or minus 2 root 2. Let's go ahead and try another one and see different cases that might pop up. So for this one, you'll notice it's equal to negative 3. We want to move that 3 to the other side because our quadratic has to be equal to 0. When we do that, we can then identify A, B, and C. And we can plug it in. X equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. When we simplify this, we're going to first take what's under the square root, and we're going to figure out what this all is. When we simplify all of that, we are going to get negative 35. Now here's where normally you would say, hey, there's no real solution. And that's true, there's no real solution. But with stuff that we've learned from this unit, we can say, hey, I know the square root of a negative. That negative here is going to come out as an I. And then I'm going to take 35 and see if I can break it down. 35 is 7 times 5, so I can't break it down anymore because there's no number pair, so it's just going to remain root 35. The last thing I'm going to do is I'm going to break this into two separate fractions. So negative 5 over 10 reduces to negative 1/2. And the square root of 35, I root 35 rather, over 10, nothing reduces there because the 35 is inside the radical and the 10 is not. So you cannot reduce those numbers. So our final answer is x equals negative 1/2 plus or minus I root 35 over 10. Now let's try one more. Again, a different case here. We do want to get this equal to 0, so we're going to add 27 to the other side. We get 3x squared plus 27 equals 0. In this case here, our a value is 3. 27 here is actually our c value. Our b value is 0 because it is missing. There's no just x term here. So b is 0. So now what we're going to do is x equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. Once again, we're going to take everything under the square root and we're going to simplify this first. So underneath your square root here, we're going to end up with negative 324 when we put that all together. All over 6. 0 plus or minus anything is just going to be whatever that plus or minus thing is. So I'm not going to write the 0 anymore because it's not actually changing my answer. The square root of negative 324. Let's deal with the 324. The square root of 324 is actually 18. It's a nice number. And then the square root of the negative part makes it an imaginary number. So that's going to simplify to 18i. And then the very last thing here is 18 over 6 is going to end up reducing. So my final answer here is going to end up being x equals plus or minus 3i. So hopefully you feel pretty good about your quadratic formula, and I hope you have a good day.